Silok! Hey Silok, where's the Jackbox 4 video? Silok! Jackbox 4? Are you gonna do Jackbox 4?
Kermit, I thought I told you I'd get back to Jackbox after I'm done moving.
Yeah. So, Jackbox 4?
Okay, look, if I literally drop everything I'm doing and do this Jackbox 4 video, will you patiently wait for Jackbox 5?
Silok, of course I would.
You're just saying that.
When have I ever lied to you? When have I ever lied to you in the last 5 minutes?
Alright. Fine then, I'll get to it.
Fool. I would never patiently wait for him.
Alright, you know the deal by now. The Jackbox Party Pack games are a compilation of 5 games per pack, 6 in this case, which I'll get into shortly, where you and all your buds all use your phones as controllers by simply going to jackbox.tv. No downloads or special peripherals needed. As long as you have a web browser on your phone, you got a controller and you're ready to go. In my opinion, this is the best party game series of all time, but after the success of Jackbox 3, Party Pack 4 had a lot of expectations to live up to. So how do you surpass the most critically acclaimed Party Pack? Well, you don't. Although I still think Party Pack 4 is easily the most underrated in this series. And with 6 games opposed to the usual 5, there's a lot to sink your teeth into. So let's hop into the first game and do just that. The first game in the pack, or rather the first games in the pack, are Fibbage 3 and Fibbage Enough About You. That's right, the quote-unquote 6th game in this pack is a spin-off of Fibbage that, despite having the same gameplay structure, ends up feeling thematically different thanks to all the questions in that version being about the players. But let's start with vanilla Fibbage 3. For those of you unfamiliar with the previous Fibbage games, Fibbage is a trivia game, up to 8 players by the way, that will ask everyone a question with a fill-in-the-blank answer. On your phone, you will enter a believable lie that could fill in the blank. Everybody submits their lies, and all of those lies, alongside the real answer, will be thrown up on the TV screen. If you can correctly pick which answer on the screen is the real in-game answer and not a player-submitted lie, you get points. Conversely, if you pick someone's lie instead, they get points and you get nothing. This keeps going on for 6 or so questions, and at the end, the player with the highest score wins. So that's great and all, but this is the 3rd installment, so what's different? Well, right off the bat, you're going to notice how fantastic the presentation here is. Fibbage 3 goes for this retro 70s aesthetic, and they absolutely nail it. The vibrant pastel color choices alongside the bubbly animations already makes a game that looks great, but then they hit you with that fantastic soundtrack, and it really completes the package.
Fibbage 3. Let's agree to disagree.
By the way, this is probably something you're going to hear me bring up a lot because Party Pack 4 might have the best standalone soundtrack in the entire series. Alright, cool, so the game is the best looking and sounding Fibbage we've seen yet. Any gameplay changes? Yeah, there's a few. First of all, they removed the defibrillator from Fibbage 2. You know, that thing that allowed you to remove all but one lie in the real answer? Not a huge loss or anything, but it seems a bit odd they only included that addition in one game. The audience feature has been greatly improved. As per usual, once the player cap has been exceeded, or even while a game is still in progress, any extra players can join as an audience member to participate in the game. In Fibbage 2, all you could do is vote for your favorite lies that the player submitted, which did not supply points, so it was more of a jokey addition more than anything. Here in Fibbage 3, on the other hand, not only will liking a lie give the player who made that lie some points now, but the audience members can now vote for a lie that will be thrown in with all the other answers. That addition especially can make the game really tricky because if you got a full game of 8 players plus an audience, you have to find the single truth out of 10 answers. That inclusion alone almost makes it more questionable why they removed the defibrillator, but again, not a huge loss. For non-audience members, the final round has a different format where you answer 2 fill-in-the-blank answers opposed to 1. And lastly, Fibbage 3 has some additional round categories for some variety. You got a celebrity social media round where the question will be a stupid quote from something a celebrity has said, a Russian category where all the questions will be about a Russian phrase, and my favorite, time to look at this, which will provide a picture of an art piece or invention, and everybody has to submit what they think it could be called. All in all, Fibbage is just as much fun here as it's ever been, and this 3rd installment in particular is undoubtedly the definitive version of Fibbage to play. That's not all though, because because we also have our bonus game, Fibbage Enough About You. Now this is a great addition. In this version of Fibbage, all of the questions will be about the players. It will ask you something like, what's the longest thing you've ever stood in line for? Just answer truthfully. Then the prompt will be passed to the other players, instead asking, what do you think is the longest line this player has been in? Just like in Fibbage, your friends get points if the other people choose their lie opposed to your truthful answer. In turn, this results in a game where you're being quizzed on how much you know about your friends. It's a lot of fun. I sort of have mixed feelings on the final round, however. Instead of asking you a question with any sort of guidance, the game just asks you to submit one lie about yourself and one truth. You get points for everyone who picks your lie, and your opponents get points if they pick your truth. So the idea is you want to think of a lie that sounds true and something truthful that sounds fake. The problem with this format is that the more you play this game, the less stuff you're going to have to lie about unless you're playing with an entirely new group of friends. Being this open-ended can really put you on the spot, and you're just not going to have enough time to write a good lie or truth unless you thought of one beforehand. Due to this, you will often see this cop-out bullcrap where someone will just make the lie the opposite of the truth. So if their truth was, I like Taco Bell, they would put, I don't like Taco Bell as the lie. Honestly though, that is often the best case scenario, because the worst case scenario is when people either A, put some non-coherent nonsense, or B, just straight up lie altogether. The way to fix this round would be to either 1, give each player a bit more direction. Like instead of write anything, maybe the game could go, write a truth about yourself pertaining to pets. Or secondly, just redo the format of this round altogether. Like maybe another player could write your lie, or you have to choose from a selection of lies, or I don't know, I think you could figure out something that works a little better than this. This was so close to being the perfect party game with a more personal twist. But despite that last round, Fibbage Enough About You is still a great addition. When it comes to party pack games entirely built around the social chemistry of the group playing, aka games where you need to know the people you're playing with, your options are basically this or role models. Understandably, this more intimate approach to game design doesn't appeal to everyone, but if you're hankering for a Jackbox game that feels more personal, then this extra game is not one you're going to want to miss out on. Survive the Internet. This is our fill-in-the-blank game of the pack comparable to something like Quiplash, but a little more convoluted. The game starts by asking you a question you're expected to answer truthfully. Those answers will then be sent to other players, and the idea is to make the response look ridiculous by turning them into a response for something else entirely. For example, I received someone's response, whatever, them be them. What was that a response to? I don't know, but now it's a response to hashtag homeless people on fire. Once everyone's burns were submitted, it shows how each response was twisted one by one. Players vote on which twist they like the most, and points are distributed based on what people voted for. This keeps going for a couple of rounds until you reach the final round, where you will be asked a question and have one of 2 responses to pick between. Whatever response you picked will correlate to a picture, which will then get sent to someone else to write a caption. So if the game is asking you what sounds harder and you answer learning Russian, someone is probably going to end up captioning Mount Tetris or some shit. From there, it's the same deal as the other rounds. Vote on who had the best response, and points are distributed based on what players voted for. Just like most other Jackbox games, whoever has the most points by the end is deemed the victor, and then sent to hell. This one is up to 8 players, and any extra audience members get to vote alongside the players, providing some extra points to whomever they voted for. This game has got its hardcore fans for sure. I've even heard people argue that this is flat out the best Jackbox game. As for me, while I really enjoy the premise of this one, there definitely are a few things that keep it from being as solid as Quiplash. One of the bigger problems is how many responses the game will show at once, and how they roll out one by one on the screen. When you have to read 8 different prompts in a full game, the focus is going to be on the last one presented. So even if the first entry was the best, the player is getting the short end of the stick because it was read off like a minute ago. In other words, if the first and last prompt are about equally as funny, people will be more likely to vote for the last one because that's what they're laughing at right now. Comedy often isn't logical. The best jokes catch you by surprise, and then the effect fades quickly. Most people don't make a big ordeal out of voting. They just do it instinctively. That's just the nature of a comedy game. Unless the round was full of duds, the first response to be shown is at a huge disadvantage when it was shown off a full minute ago. If you're playing with more than 5 players or so, it should really split the players up so you're not looking at an entire wall of jokes simultaneously. Because again, given the nature of comedy, that vote probably won't be fair. Unfortunately, that's far from my only gripe. Simply put, I think the character limit is too high. When you are thrown a response this long, that's a tall order to try to make it work in any capacity. The reason a setup of this length works in a game like Quiplash is because you have the announcer audibly read it. And then it's like, boom, joke, but in Survive the Internet, especially when it's presenting voiceless response after voiceless response. I've had a few times where the punchline and setup were both so long, it went away before I could even finish reading it. Admittedly, that doesn't happen too often, but what does happen often is the punchline popping up while you are still reading the setup, which makes it significantly less humorous because the punchline is accompanied with a whip sound. A snappy sound with a snappy comeback can make a delivery really funny, but only if you're ready to read it. When you hear a whip sound while you're still reading someone's drawn out setup, that disconnect ruins the effect entirely. Not to mention, answers of this nature can really put players at a disadvantage. In Quiplash, if there was a bad prompt you can't do much with, the game is still fair, because 2 players will receive that prompt. Hence, the winner will still be whoever was able to make the best of a bad prompt. But when you are the only player stuck with the one drawn out restrictive response that was randomly assigned to you, you're put at a huge disadvantage when everybody else got short and sweet prompts that provide flexibility. And as if some of the players' responses weren't restrictive enough, sometimes the expected format itself can be. Yeah, that's right. Each round has a random theme tied to it. Like, for example, sometimes the game will ask the players to write a vague review for something, and then it's up to the player who received that review to decide what location that review is for. That might not sound too bad, but every time I've played this, there is someone who forgets the ill-defined guidelines for that round and responds to it as if it was a comment. Like right here. I appreciate the joke there, buddy, but sorry, my outdated Smash video idea is not a location. The last critique I have is a bit of a smaller one, but I think the game would be a lot better if you could visibly see the picture you were sending for the final round. I mean, it seems weird to give you points for their joke when you had no idea what you were sending them in the first place. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that anytime that somebody votes on an answer that had your original submission in it, you get some pity points. And yeah, for whatever reason, that includes pictures you had no idea you were sending. So oof, that's a lot there. Admittedly, I think it's upsetting just how many flaws this game has when the setup, as I said, is really strong. There are a few things you can do to relegate these issues, such as making sure players A, don't give genuine responses to the questions the game asks them, and B, don't write overly long responses. However, much like my stance of a game like WordSpud, I don't think you should have to play around problems. Features in a game should be there to enhance the game, not to intentionally avoid. Having said all of this, I want to make it clear that I do think Survive the Internet is fun, but those things I mentioned can really limit the game. Limits, mind you, that you should take into consideration when jumping into a session of this. Unlike Quiplash, the group playing I think all needs to be on the same page for this game to work. Fortunately, I think Survive the Internet is a perfect candidate for a sequel. You fix a lot of these problems, and I think it could even be a contender of Quiplash. This might sound odd, but I think something that could really save this game is text-to-speech for the setups for each joke. That way you could have the TTS audibly read the prompt out loud, and then when the burn comes in with a snappy whip sound, everybody was ready for it. Plus, given the whole theme of the game is socially awkward internet interactions, I think text-to-speech would absolutely complement the archaic aesthetic here. Survive the Internet is a quirky game, definitely one of its ups and downs, but overall I would say it's a decent one, and one that, hopefully, will someday be made even better. Monster Seeking Monster. Now this is an interesting one. I'm not even sure what to compare this to. It really is its own thing. So you and up to 6 of your friends, yeah, this is the only Jackbox game with a 7-player cap opposed to 8 for some reason. Maybe they limit it to 7 since the audience could count as a dateable 8th. Even with a full game of 7 and an audience member though, it's extremely rare to have nights where everybody gets a date. So just make the player cap 8. Anyways, not a decision I agree with or understand, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The premise is that you and all your friends are all monsters trying to go out on dates with other monsters. There are 6 different nights which basically correspond to rounds, and during each, you have a total of 4 texts you can send to any player you like. The idea is that you're trying to set up a date through your text, because once everybody is out of text, you get to decide on who you're going out with. And if 2 players pick each other, they both score a heart. Hearts are basically the game's points, and whoever has the most by the end is the winner. It sounds pretty simple, but where the strategy comes in is with all the various monster types. Everybody has a different monster, and every monster has a special ability. You got monsters like the Ghost, who can make you lose a heart if it asks you on a date and you reject it. The Serial Killer, who will steal 2 hearts from whoever they date more than once. The Invisible Person, who will always appear to be in last despite their score. There's a lot of different monster types, and trying to hide which monster you are whilst trying to figure out which monsters your opponents are make for a deceptively strategic Jackbox game. Starting on the end of the second night, the end of each night will reveal the hidden monster power of whoever has the highest score. Depending on the monster being revealed, this can be extremely damning to the player. Like for example, if you're a mummy, which at the end of the game will steal half a heart for each person they dated, you're basically done for if you get revealed because nobody's going to want to lose hearts. Because of this, it might actually be beneficial to intentionally not get a date to keep your score down, if it means keeping your monster ability a secret. The audience is a bit weird with this one. Any extra players will get to vote on what predetermined text responses will be sent to other players. They can't select who these texts will be sent to, just on what will be said to whoever decides to text the audience player. Players controlling the audience monster also get to vote on who will be asked out, but yeah, I always thought this was a weird implementation. To be honest, I like the audience player more when it's being controlled by the AI. You can still date the audience player even when there isn't even a single player in the audience. It's just a crapshoot whether or not it'll date you back because, well, it's an AI. I really like this because in the example I brought up earlier of the mummy, if absolutely no one is even going to try to date you, you can try your luck with the game-controlled audience player. It's not guaranteed, but in a situation like that, it might be the only option you have. It's probably important to mention that the audience player is a secret monster as well, so depending on what it is, you might not want to date the audience either. Lastly, if you have the audience turned off and only have 3 or 4 players, a robot monster will hop in the game starting in round 2. This is such a weird inclusion that almost transforms the game entirely. The gimmick of the robot is that you do not want it to lose by any means necessary, because if that robot gets last, it destroys humanity and everybody loses. Keeping the robot out of last can be really tricky because the robot will lose a heart every round regardless or not if they get a date. This is a really cool feature. One I wish was more prominent because odds are most people who own Party Pack 4 aren't even going to know about the robot. Because I mean, how many people are going into the option to turn the audience support off? It's on by default, and I would assume most owners of Jackbox 4 don't even think twice about it. If the player count is going to be capped at 7 no matter what, then an option to turn the robot player on or off despite the number of players really should be in the settings. In spite of that, Monster Seeking Monster sounds pretty good. And yeah, it's not exactly the funniest Jackbox game, but the strategy at play with this one cannot be overlooked. In fact, this was likely the most strategic Party Pack game at the time of its release. The most comparable game prior would have been Bidiots, and that game relies on a lot more luck than people give it credit for when you really start to break it down. I already blabbered on about Bidiots for a full 10 minutes in my Jackbox 2 review if you want to get my full thoughts on that one. In any case, yeah, there is a lot more skill to employ in this game than any other entry before it. If I had to critique Monster Seeking Monster, I would say I really don't get the 4 text limit. I understand maybe they did it because it will show the entire conversation between 2 players when someone asks the other person out. You know, maybe they just didn't want the presented conversation to be too long, but at that rate, they should have just capped it to 4 text per person. I think allowing you to have more than 4 total text would allow for much more strategy and deception. You could lead more players on, you could text more people for shits and giggles, or text people to secure a future date without having to worry about the text limit for your current night state. Ultimately, that's just a nitpick more than anything because Monster Seeking Monster does what it sets out to do very well. Also, special shout out to that final night music. I mean, the sound design for this game is already fantastic, but then it hits you with that last night theme.
And I know you caught some feelings for me too.
Perfection. While Monster Seeking Monster might not be the funniest Jackbox game, it will likely appeal to players who enjoy a strategic party experience. The barrier of entry is a bit higher in this one compared to something like Quiplash, but for those willing to put in the time, this is a game you'll likely enjoy. Bracketeering. It really seems like this Jackbox, more so than any of the other entries in the series, was meant for big groups of people. I mean, this is the first party pack without a game you can play by yourself. And then you got this game, which is the first party pack inclusion with a player cap of 16. Bracketeering is a fill-in-the-blank comedy game that's split up into 3 rounds. And while each round is slightly different, the repeated setup prompts you and your friends to enter the best answer you could come up with for a topic. For example, I did a game where the first category was best street name to add to the Monopoly board, in which I submitted Poverty Street, but yeah, you can enter whatever you want. Everybody's answers will then go up against each other in a bracket-style competition where winning answers will keep rising up the tournament ladder until a single winning answer remains. You get points every time your answer wins, but you can also score points by correctly voting voting on which answer you think will win the current bracket. It will have you vote on the bracket that your answer is in. So sometimes you have to swallow your pride and vote against your own submission if you see someone else's response you just know is going to win. However, if the answer you voted for gets caught in a tiebreaker, anyone who voted for the currently tied answer has to button mash your answer to victory. Basically, a tie is declared, a button shows up on your screen, and whichever answer had more total button presses is the answer that proceeds to the next round. The first round is a straightforward bracket with a single presented category. The second round is a blind bracket where you will get a vague idea of what the category will be, but won't absolutely know for sure until everybody has submitted an answer. And the final round is a triple blind bracket where the category will change every single bracket. The final round is easily the most entertaining because you could have an answer that totally dominates the current bracket, but things could completely flip once the category changes and now you're stuck with an answer that doesn't work nearly as well. At the end, the player with the highest score after all 3 rounds is the winner. That's basically the gist of it. Bracketeering is a pretty bare bones party pack game, probably most comparable to Quiplash except with less prompts and made to accommodate more players. This game gets a pretty bad rep, however I will say this. If you can actually get a full game of 16 people that all share a similar sense of humor, this can actually be a pretty solid time. Unfortunately, that's a pretty tall order. Getting 16 people to play a Jackbox game is already hard enough, but having all 16 of those people be close friends of yours is even harder. When you're playing with randos, certain jokes can really outstay their welcome. A response about Peter Griffin could be kind of funny in passing, like if you saw it for a single round of Quiplash, but when that Peter Griffin prompt is still in the game 3 brackets later, it can make rounds of this painful to sit through. In most Jackbox games, if you don't think something is that funny, it's usually not a big deal since player submitted answers don't stay in the game for that long. But in Bracketeering, they do. That's just the nature of a bracket. When you look at it like that, Bracketeering is really fighting an uphill battle when its objective is to be a funny party game. Brackets are long term. In contrast, jokes typically aren't. Period. In spite of everything I just said, I find this to be a really good game to stream. I mean, when you got a full game of 16 with a decently sized audience, rounds of Bracketeering can feel super high energy. I can't stream like I used to, just given current living situations, but when I used to do weekly streams, this was always a go-to game for me and my viewers. So take that for what it is. Really not much else to say. Bracketeering can be fun if you got tons of people playing games, but if you got a group of 8 or less, there's unfortunately not many reasons to play this over Quiplash. Lastly, we have our drawing game, Civic Doodle. In Civic Doodle, up to 8 players take turns adding doodles onto a shared canvas. The game starts with just a haphazard line on a blank piece of paper, and the first 2 players up get to add whatever additions they like. There's a short timer for each turn, and when that timer is up, all the other players vote on which art piece between the 2 they like more. The winning art piece of that turn becomes the template for the next turn, and this keeps going until everyone has had a couple of times to add their own scribbles to the canvas. Additionally, there is a weird emoji scoring system in play. While other people are drawing, you can tag emojis to either one of the canvases, and whenever the timer runs out, the game will assign extra points to whichever drawing had more of whatever random emoji it decided was important that turn. The emojis also work as a tiebreaker whenever both canvases get an equal number of votes. After a finalized canvas has been voted on, everyone gets to submit a name for what they think the drawing should be called. Strange to say, but despite this being a drawing game, I think the addition of being able to name the monstrosity everybody's responsible for is my favorite part of Civic Doodle. Ironically, it always ends up providing the biggest laughs during the entire duration of the game. I have my own theory as to why that is, but let me cover the final round first. During the final round, instead of everybody taking turns, each player gets their own individual canvas, and instead of having free range to draw whatever, you get a certain instruction on what to draw, typically a facial feature. Everyone will draw something like the eyes, timer runs out, everybody votes on the best eyes, those eyes become the template for the next turn, then it'll tell you to draw a nose or whatever, you get the idea. This keeps going until you have a complete picture. Unfortunately, unlike the previous rounds, you don't get to name your abomination, as the name is the very first thing provided to you. Seems like a missed opportunity since most players tend to ignore the inferred title anyway and just draw whatever they think is funniest. During any of the rounds, anytime your additional doodle gets voted on, you get points, and the player with the highest score by the end is the winner. Civic Doodle might be one of the most controversial Jackbox games. People seem to either think it's the best drawing game or the worst. Unfortunately, I am part of the latter opinion. I don't think the game is bad, and I like the last round in particular a lot. Nonetheless, my main problem with this game is that everybody playing has to be aware of the general progression of it for it to work. When I would play Civic Doodle on stream, there's always someone who fills the entire canvas up with a single submission. And then everybody participating is just like, wowee, look at all that stuff they drew. That's getting my vote for sure. Completely oblivious to the fact that more people have to draw on the amalgamation of a canvas until it's their turn to draw. At which point I can only assume their reaction is something along the lines of, uh-oh. Since it seems to be instinctive for people to use most of the canvas, it doesn't give the other players a lot to work with. So from there, it's typically just a contest of who could draw the most wieners, guns, swastikas, boogers, or facial hair on the original drawing, since there's not much else you could fit. This can be especially bad during the final round if people decide to not listen to the on-screen rubrics. Here in this footage you're watching, instead of drawing eyes like the game said to do, someone instead drew a big gaping hole in his face. It of course stood out, ends up getting the vote, and great. What am I supposed to do with this? Draw a nose, it says. But of course I can't, because now there's no room for a nose. This ruined the game so much, the winning drawing ended up looking like this. Speaking of the final round, that is the most bugged out round in probably any Jackbox ever, and about half the games I play, it will only fully draw one or two of the faces, leaving the rest of the canvases with an incomplete mess of shapes and lines, which unfairly puts other players at a huge disadvantage, since when it comes time to vote, you can't properly see how their additions are affecting the original drawing, since most of the original drawing is not there. If this was a one-time thing, I would dismiss it as a rare glitch, but when I said this happens half the games I play, I was not kidding. I'm not even sure how something this prominent ever got past playtesting. So people trying too hard to get the attention of their peers can ruin the game for sure. But as long as you play with a group of like-minded buds, or you know, people who don't fill up the entire canvas of an obnoxious mess on the first go, then the game is good, right? Well, a more subdued approach to Civic Doodle definitely makes it a lot better. But there's still one glaring problem present regardless of how people are playing. And that problem is, Civic Doodle is a drawing game that relies on its comedy entirely, and it's just not that funny. Drawing games like Bidiots or Drawful aren't always funny, but they are functional and enjoyable as structured games. Whereas Civic Doodle's foundation is completely reliant on how funny it is. And without the shock value of something like TKO, it fails as a comedic drawing game. The game can lead to some funny end results for sure, which is why the naming portion in particular can be so funny. But a drawing can only be so funny when you're watching a doodle of zero direction slowly be unraveled onto the screen. I mean, in most circumstances, the pacing is so slow, you already know what direction a player is taking the drawing before they've even finished it, which obviously makes the drawing significantly less funny once it's finished. This is why I like the final round in particular. Well, when it's working at least. But when you're focused on your own drawing, you're not watching the other drawings. So when you finally look up, you're being fed a large amount of information all at once, kind of leaning more into that shock value factor you'd expect in most other comedy-centric games. But even then, I think the final round could have been made better by expanding the canvas with each subsequent round. Like if the first round asked you to draw the head, but then the following round would pan the picture down and ask you to draw the body, that would at least help prevent the issue of someone using up the entire canvas in one go. But I don't know. It's sort of hard to fully address Civic Doodle's problems completely without transforming the game into something else entirely. It's just a weak foundation to work off of that I think should just be left as what it is. And what it is just an okay drawing game. I also feel obligated to mention the absolutely terrible host for this game. It is hands down the worst voiceovers in any Jackbox game. I mean, you got a drawing game that already isn't too funny, but then when you're forced to listen to the painfully unfunny narration,
oh, you remember, they live down by the gravy factory, you know, the river of gravy.
The game functions mostly fine. Trying to give it some sort of credit, the drawing element at the very least feels appropriate, unlike something like Bidiots where you could almost remove the drawing portion entirely. I know I'm always taking pot shots at Bidiots, but come on. You don't even have to draw anything, and that game will just auto-generate all the content for you. All in all, not a terrible game, but it's definitely my least favorite Jackbox drawing game. And that's Jackbox Party Pack 4. Party Pack 4 is full of ups and downs, and it's not hard to see why many are so critical about this entry in particular. Regardless, I still stand by my original assertion of this easily being the most underrated party pack. Hands down the best version of Fibbage. There's Enough About You, which is a fantastic addition, and one so thematically different I think it's only fair to consider it as its own standalone game. Monster Seeking Monster, which is a really creative strategy game. Survive the Internet, a comedic fill-in-the-blank game that many people regard as one of the best. And then Bracketeering and Civic Doodle, while not great games, they're definitely not horrible additions. I mean, it's not like these are comparable to WordSpud or anything. A comedy game, a trivia game, a drawing game, and a strategy game. Party Pack 4 not only has some decent variety, but it's all presented very well. As I said prior, this probably has my favorite complete soundtrack from any of the other party packs. Not to mention, this is a great value too. This is the last party pack priced at $25, and even if not all of these are must-have inclusions, you're getting 6 games opposed to the standard 5, and that can't be overlooked. I'm giving the Jackbox Party Pack 4 a 3.9 out of 5. While not as strong as its predecessor, this is still a solid collection of games. I find myself booting up this pack a lot for Fibbage Enough About You specifically. Plus, while I would say Party Pack 3 is objectively the more rounded out experience, all of those games are sort of obsolete due to future entries. Quiplash 3, Trivia Murder Party 2, Champed Up, and Push to Button are all better than their Jackbox 3 equivalent. Whereas Party Pack 4 still has a selection that is uniquely its own, making it more relevant in the face of its peers. For that reason alone and many more, Party Pack 4 is an underrated collection I would absolutely recommend. Hey, thanks for watching. Don't mind the echo, it's 6 AM and I'm in a different room because I don't want to wake up my roommates. All my Jackbox reviews are in a playlist linked in the description if you'd like to see more. And I'd like to give a shout out to patrons such as Kinslow Tien, Drew Kellenberger, Naomi Norbez, Michael Moose, Raffi, David Pacheco, Benson Lucht, John Hancock, Jeffrey P. Long, Oliver Larkosh, Cashinator, Pretoria Mars, Amanda Guth, Rami Batter, and Abby Knudsen. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, have a good one.